So I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Eunice Kim, the Long Range Planning Manager for the City of Salem. Welcome to our last policy meeting for the Our Salem project. We've been holding these meetings since the end of March, and I appreciate everyone joining us on this last Wednesday. With me here are a few other staff members, Austin, Patricia, Julie. If you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Austin Ross. I'm a long-range planner with the City of Salem.
Hi, I'm Patricia Farrell. I'm the Parks and Natural Resources Planner and also working on the Salem Climate Action Plan.
Hi, I'm Julie Warnicke. I'm the Transportation Planning Manager with the Public Works Department.
Great. And as a reminder, I forgot to say this earlier, but our chats are, we're going to capture the chats and put those online. So I just want to let everyone know those will be public as well. So tonight really is an opportunity for us to circle back to everyone after these weekly policy meetings that we've been holding for the Our Salem project. And so we really want to kind of summarize high level what we've heard and kind of where we're headed. So I start all these meetings with a project overview. So we're all on the same page with what we're working on and kind of where we are in the process. And then really we're going to focus on high level kind of takeaways that we have gotten from our outreach, both during these policy meetings, as well as our survey that's still online and our many community meetings that we're having throughout the community. And so we'll kind of walk through different topics and let you know kind of some of the takeaways. It's not all the takeaways by any means, but some of the high level takeaways we wanted to just circle back to you on. And then if you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop them in the chat anytime and we will address them. So just as a reminder, we are working on the Our Salem project. This is a multi-year project to update our comprehensive plan. That is the document that really has high-level goals and policies and a map that really guide how we grow and develop over the next 10, 20, 30 years. It covers everything from housing to economic development, transportation, the environment. So it's really the big, broad framework that, again, we use as a city to direct how our community grows in the long term. There's a lot of other work going on in the city right now, and we're kind of collaborating, coordinating across the city. And I just wanted to mention two of those efforts. One of the other major effort that's going on right now is a climate action plan. There's a lot of overlap between the climate action plan and the Our Salem project in that both are really looking at ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And the climate action plan is also focused on how to make the community more resilient. So there's a lot of strategies from the climate action plan that will be rolled up into the comprehensive plan. And we're very much working together to make sure that we align. In addition, the City of Salem adopted an updated strategic plan recently in the last couple of months that, again, has a lot of overlap with both those projects and kind of has more of the short-term steps of how to continue working on these projects and to implement them. So that's just a couple of the projects. There's a lot of other work going on across the city. And so I should say that I'm thankful for all the staff across the departments that have been participating in these weekly meetings. We would not have been able to do them without them. So where are we in this project? We kicked off this project actually in, I think, 2018, but we really did the big, wide community visioning about over the last year and a half, 2 years. That's where we were really out and about talking to the community about, what are your main priorities? What are your priorities across, housing, transportation, the environment? And as we collected all of that information, we rolled them up into high-level goals and a proposed comprehensive plan map. And we put those in a vision document that we brought to City Council in March. And at that time, we weren't asking for adoption, but we were asking for direction and acceptance. We wanted to know, are these the high-level goals and the framework for the proposed comprehensive plan map that we should be using as we continue working on the details of the project? Council did accept that vision. Again, it's not adoption, but it provided us kind of with the direction to do the work we're doing now. And that work includes working on zoning regulations, the zoning map, and then the policies, which is really the focus of tonight's meeting. So this is the vision statement that's in our vision document that really captures, again, shared priorities across the community that we've heard over the last year and a half, 2 years. You'll see references to affordable housing, safe mobility choices, local businesses, diversity, and the environment. These are all things that we've heard are very important in Salem, and things that really, as we look forward to what Salem should be and what we want Salem to be in the future, continue to be part of this community. And so this is a vision statement that we are focusing on and working on having the goals and the policies support that vision. So just a reminder, we're at the last meeting of our weekly policy meetings. Again, I want to thank you all for joining us each week as you have. We've focused on a lot of different topics. And again, tonight we're going to kind of walk through each of those topics and kind of bring out some of the highlights, some of the things that have gotten a lot of support, and some new ideas that the community has brought forward that we are considering as we start working on, again, revising those policies and adding to our policies. So just as a reminder, as we kind of summarize each of these topics, the input is not just from these policy meetings, but also from the survey that's, again, still open online, as well as our community meetings. It's not to say it's a complete list, but again, we wanted to kind of highlight some of the things that we've heard. So the first topic that we had meetings on was really around equity and engagement. And one of the main takeaways from all of the different work that we've done in the community is that it's important to really think about equity, both in terms of how we do our work, the process, as well as the outcomes of the work and the impacts of that work. So in terms of engagement, it's really important, for example, that we are, we've heard from the community, it's important that we are really providing opportunities throughout the community for groups in the community to participate in our decision-making, in our planning projects, and particularly groups that maybe aren't typically at the table. So this could be communities of color, lower income folks. And so we've heard this pretty loud and clear that it's important that we have a policy in our comprehensive plan that says, yes, we are going to make this effort. We are going to expand these opportunities for participation here and going forward. And then the second bullet point that you see here is really about the impacts of our work. So again, equity in terms of process, but also outcomes. And so this idea is, are we looking at how our policies, our plans, our investment decisions really impact the community? And are we looking at who's benefiting from the work that we do and the investments that we make and the decisions that we make, and who's maybe being burdened? And are we really taking an equity lens and making sure that it's not one group that's always getting the benefits and one group, for example, that's always being burdened? And another thing that we heard is that, when we're doing all of this work, it's really important that we communicate with the people that we want to reach out to and that want to participate in our work, and ask them how they want to participate. And so, for example, we're really trying to understand, maybe one community one group in the community really wants to do face-to-face meetings at an open house, kind of your traditional, but maybe for others it's more important, or a better way to reach them is through like Facebook Live events. Maybe sometimes it's good to meet during the day, and for other groups it's good to meet in the evening. And so we're trying to really understand the best way to engage different groups by just talking to them and asking them. And so we've heard that this is important as an idea to include in our comprehensive plan. So kind of building on that, we've heard that it's important that we actually have the tools and the analysis to support our decision making and to really have that equity lens. This could be equity mapping, where we're really looking at kind of who lives where. And so when we make those decisions or start considering decisions, we understand what the impacts are. And again, to make sure certain groups aren't always being burdened, for example. And so we're looking at different tools that we could potentially use. And in one of the policy meetings we had, we focused on a specific kind of parks metrics. And so the Parks Master Plan, or the Comprehensive Parks System Master Plan, that's going to be updated after the Our Salem project, could potentially use this and use metrics like this to then kind of look at where should investments and priorities in terms of parks be made. And it's just so there's asterisks by some of these ideas on the slides. And these are ideas that we weren't necessarily testing, but ideas that we heard from the community and we wanted to reflect back, and that we're going to consider as we, again, revise the policies. So we've heard that displacement continues to be a concern in the community. whether that's a displacement of people from their homes or businesses from their businesses. And so we've heard it's really important that we consider displacement or the potential for displacement as we make our decision making, which is very much related to equity. In terms of housing, that was the second topic we focused on. Housing affordability really rose to the top as the priority. It continues to be a priority. It has been a priority in Salem. And there's been discussion about how do we incentivize more affordable housing, but also how do we look at balancing the need for affordable housing with other needs when it comes to housing. So different amenities or open spaces and energy efficiency. So for example, this also is really related to how we better serve and address the needs of our unsheltered population. And so housing affordability is very much linked to that. One of the ideas that we have heard support for is the idea of making sure we as a city continue to look at our own incentives, our own regulations, and do a review to make sure that we're not necessarily making housing more expensive because of the regulations we're putting in place. And so this is something that we have been doing and we've been trying to do more intentionally in recent years. And it's something that the community has said, yes, you should keep doing that. The other idea is really around green building, and this overlaps very much with the climate action plan and really looking at how can we make buildings more energy efficient through incentives, for example, and how do we make sure that they also, with an equity lens, don't have a negative impact on, for example, lower income communities. Energy efficiency not only helps us reach our greenhouse gas reduction goals, but also can lower costs, right? So it has an impact on housing affordability. Another idea that we've heard there's some support for is the idea of density bonuses for affordable housing. And today we don't really have traditional density bonuses. We try to incentivize affordable housing by, for example, having lower parking requirements for affordable housing developments. But we don't have kind of your traditional density bonus where we would say, if you have affordable units, then you can have maybe a taller building or you can have an increased density. But that is something that we've heard there's interest in. There's also a Senate bill right now that's moving through the legislature that would require us to actually provide density bonuses. So again, higher densities and also higher heights if housing were to be affordable. So if that bill passes, Senate Bill 8, we would implement it. So in a lot of our discussions around housing, people have brought up the importance of really making sure that we're linking housing with the transportation network, in particular our bus routes, and our transit system. And one of the reasons for that really is to promote housing where there is transit access to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. The City Council adopted a goal to be carbon neutral by 2050, and this is kind of one of the strategies that has come out of both the climate action plan that's still in process, but also a lot of the discussions with our Salem. So we're trying to tackle some of this through our mapping. So that the other portion of the Our Salem project, where we are proposing mixed use, for example, along our frequent transit routes. And we are looking at different ways of incentivizing housing or allowing more housing in those locations. And really trying to make sure that we're linking land use with transportation. And so you see this asterisk here. So as we've been talking about housing, people are wanting us to make sure that we are supporting the work that Chariots is doing. So they run the transit system, but we closely coordinate with them. And so, what can we do as a city to help transit in terms of frequency or more hours of operation or where they're expanding? And we are collaborating with them because they are going to be launching a long range plan of their own to look at what the transit system kind of long term should look like or could look like. And so again, linking land use and the changes that we're proposing with the changes that they could be making to their system long term. So in terms of the economy and jobs and economic development, one of the major things we heard from all of our outreach was that it's really important to think about equity. So really think about who is benefiting and who are we supporting and who has resources when it comes to starting a business, maintaining a business, growing a business. We've heard, for example, that we should really be working with communities of color to support businesses that are starting and trying to navigate through the systems of, grants or resources or regulations, and making sure that we help in that I know our urban development department is doing a lot of that work already, and they are working on an urban development strategy that really is focused on short-term actions that can help businesses. And I know that equity is one of the major focuses of that strategy. And so it's very much in line with what we've been hearing as well. So in terms of equity and economic development, we've heard that we should have some policies that really help support or align, the skills that people have or will need to the jobs that are here or will be here in the future. And how can we align those? And the second idea you see here is the idea of really trying to make efforts to reduce the disparities in income and employment when it comes to race, ethnicity, and disabilities. And that's something that the city is already looking at in terms of our own hiring practices, but how can we do that and encourage that more broadly in the community? And in terms of equity as well, one of the ideas that we've heard that we should consider is really, what are the impacts when we look at new areas for growth or reinvestment or new employment? What are the impacts on the existing areas that are there? So for example, while there's a lot of support for revitalizing areas, we should really be mindful, for example, of the potential again for displacement, the impact again on existing businesses and homes. As we've been talking about economic development, we often focus on growing businesses or attracting new businesses, but we've heard that it's really important that we actually support the existing businesses or continue to support the businesses that are here. Whether that means, again, aligning skills with the businesses that are here and helping them kind of make those connections, or just increasing access so people can get to those jobs. So we talked about displacement and a little about kind of local, making sure that we're encouraging the production of goods locally. How can we make connections between maybe there's a business and there's like a secondary need for that business, and maybe there's a way to link those, and so that we're not always getting services and goods from outside of the city. And through our outreach, particularly in some of our communities of color and working with businesses, we have heard that it's important that we help different communities navigate kind of our systems again, and really understanding what are their needs as communities of color in terms of businesses. They may be different, they may be similar to other businesses, but making sure we really understand what those needs are, and then that way we can address them. So I'm going to hand it over to Austin now, who's going to talk about transportation.
Thanks, Eunice. So transportation was one of the more lively policy discussions we had. It was a really good one. And one of the things that we heard was a priority was providing a complete range of transportation options and supporting mobility for people with a variety of preferences. So we know some people will choose to keep driving, but we also know that by supporting people who choose to bike or walk or use transit to get to where they go, that takes cars off the road for the people who do want to keep driving and helps them get to where they're going with less traffic. So this policy or this idea is really about supporting that complete range of options for folks. So the policy ideas that we have that support that idea are about making sure that multiple modes of transportation are viable. So right now, driving is probably the most efficient way to get around the city. So what can we do to make sure that things like biking or walking or riding the bus are efficient as well, and make sure that those are a good option for people too. And then part of that is working on expanding our routes for active transportation, so biking and walking, and making sure that maybe those routes aren't on the busy streets that we have for driving. So not on collectors and arterials, but maybe more on local streets. And then this last idea that came from the community more recently was exploring ways to make sure that our transit operations are more efficient. So whether that's by signal priority at stoplights or exploring the possibility of dedicated lanes in certain locations, making sure that transit is working efficiently. The next big idea that has kind of come out of our conversations around transportation is that it's important to reduce our reliance on driving as the primary means of getting around, because it is the primary source of greenhouse gas emissions in Salem. So to support that, we're looking at ways of decreasing reliance on single occupancy vehicles as the dominant means. Again, we know people are going to choose to keep driving, but we want to get away from that being the only good option. So that's one way that we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Another is looking at ways to manage our transportation demand. So maybe there are ways to reduce congestion at our peak driving times, so that people spend less time idling in traffic, because those are carbon emissions that aren't helping people get around. So to the extent that we can reduce congestion, that goes well and aligns with our efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions too. And then this new idea that's come from the community recently is, we've heard all along that electrical vehicle charging stations should be something that the city supports and helps incentivize. But we've also heard more recently that maybe those would be good opportunities to give other mobility devices a place to charge as well. So whether that's e-bikes or people's personal electric mobility chairs, making sure our charging stations can serve those multiple modes could be a really beneficial thing. So moving on to the topic of parks and recreation, one of the big things that came out of that conversation was prioritizing limited resources. So people have told us that the biggest priority for them is looking at places for new parks and ways to improve existing parks. And some of the other ideas we have might be nice, but maybe they shouldn't be the top priority. So in order to support this idea, we're looking at things like providing an equitable distribution of parks and making sure that we're prioritizing underserved areas for new park development and redevelopment. Another idea is reinvesting in existing parks to make sure that we're enhancing the quality of services. So maybe that means looking at places where there's an existing park that serves a lot of people that could be made better to more efficiently meet people's needs or better meet people's needs. And then another idea that came from these policy meetings was that maybe public-private partnerships can help maximize the impact of the resources that we're spending on parks. We know that we can't spend as much as we maybe want to on parks because we do have finite resources. And so maybe partnering with private entities could help us fill in some of those gaps. The next big idea is about providing a variety of park types. So whether that's just the types of amenities that are in parks or the way that we're building them, or maybe not developing them as much and leaving them more natural. There's a need for all of those different types of parks. So some ideas that we have to support that are having an array of different park types. So right now we kind of have the neighborhood, community, and regional park model, but maybe we should be looking at things like pocket parks, which are just small parks that maybe are on a vacant lot in an existing neighborhood. And they're really small and they fill a need, but they aren't the traditional format that we've used in the past, or maybe a linear park that follows a creek or connects two existing parks to one another would be a really beneficial thing. So exploring those options. And then the third bullet point here is about universal design and making sure that our park and recreation facilities are welcoming to people of all ages and abilities, and making sure that we're catering to everybody. So moving on to the environment, we had another really good conversation about this, and one of the big things that came out of it was increasing the amount of protection for our natural resources in Salem, especially waterways, and riparian corridors. So to support that, we have a more broad policy to start out, policy idea about protecting the overall quality and function of our natural resources. And then it gets a little bit more specific about protecting riparian areas and restoring degraded riparian corridors, protecting habitat for native plants and wildlife. And then a new idea that has come up more recently is maybe looking at ways to reduce the use of herbicides and pesticides because those can affect our riparian areas, whether it's through efforts to control invasive species or from runoff from like people's private property. They can have an impact on our riparian areas. So reducing the use of them could help us maintain those resources. The next big idea is about making sure Salem is more resilient to disasters and climate change. We've heard this is an important thing. We would tend to agree. And so we have some policy ideas that support this idea. The first one is about making sure that we're resilient to climate change more generally. So whether that's helping to protect our public health or our natural systems or the resiliency of the community overall as the climate changes maybe more slowly. So these could be like slow warming or various things that are less sudden, but still important to be considering. The next one is seismic upgrades. So that gets at something that would be more a natural disaster, a really sudden impact, and making sure that our infrastructure is ready for an event like that. And then the last one is more about making sure that people are prepared for a disaster or for increased natural hazards. And so we already do a lot of outreach as a city, but maybe we could make our outreach a little bit more targeted to make sure that we're working with our most vulnerable residents or people who aren't necessarily as plugged into what the city is doing. So whether that is lower income residents or communities of color or other vulnerable populations, really making that extra step to reach them. The next big idea is about environmental justice and making sure that we are supporting the people who are most vulnerable to changes in our environment. We do have a policy that's been proposed about making sure our benefits from efforts to protect ourselves from climate change and the burdens potentially of some of those efforts aren't or are distributed equitably, making sure that one group isn't bearing the burden while another group benefits. And then we have a couple new ideas that have come from the community. The first is about making sure we're centering environmental racism in this conversation. So when we talk about mitigating or adapting to climate change, making sure that we're acknowledging that racial component and the fact that not all groups in our community are equally impacted by these changes. And so making sure that that's a part of the conversation is a new idea that could be important. And then sort of along the same lines, addressing the fact that air quality is also an equity issue. So maybe low-income communities are more likely to live in areas where there's worse air quality. So whether that's close to a highway or closer to industrial areas, and acknowledging that there is a component of this environmental work that affects directly people's well-being is important. So then we'll move on to public facilities and services. I think this is the last topic we're going to cover. And the first big idea from that is that clean, safe drinking water should continue to be a priority. We already work hard to provide this, but we've heard loud and clear that it's really important, and obviously so. So the first policy idea is about water source diversification. So making sure that we have sources planned out to meet our current and future needs, making sure that they're diverse sources so that if one source is impacted, we have others that can take the place of that first one. The next one about water quality is just making sure that we're meeting all our regulatory standards. This is something we're already doing again, but making sure it's in the comprehensive plan really emphasizes the fact that it is a priority, and it ensures that it'll stay a priority for the long term. And then this last one about water sources, I think was an idea that came after the fires last summer. And understanding that in order to protect our water sources, we needed to coordinate with a lot of other stakeholders, whether those are at other jurisdictions of government, so maybe regional or state or federal agencies, to recover from that impact to our water system and the drainages that supply our water sources, and making sure that we're coordinating more closely in the future can really help us make sure that our water system is more resilient. The next one is about community space, and we've heard from a lot of different places that there's a need for more community space for a variety of purposes throughout the city. And so the first idea here is about encouraging private property holders, so businesses, schools, other organizations, to provide community spaces within their facilities. So something like Broadway Commons, where it's private property, but they do offer a lot of spaces for community gathering, is a good example of that, and encouraging more of that throughout the community. The next one is about encouraging just more community centers distributed around Salem. And so this is more of like developing these spaces to be public all the time. And then the last one is about ensuring that our campuses are providing amenities and services to serve the neighborhoods that they're in. So whether that's schools or universities or other types of campuses, even libraries, making sure that they're providing direct amenities and space for their surrounding neighborhoods to gather. Then the next big idea is about food access and about making sure that we're providing or addressing access to fresh food in a variety of ways. So the first idea here is about allowing grocery stores, food co-ops, things like that more broadly in Salem, especially in areas where access is limited right now. So we have some neighborhoods where there aren't really many close options for buying groceries. And so maybe that requires some changes in land use to allow more grocery stores in more places. The next one is about promoting locally grown food. So farmers markets, community gardens, and making sure we're supporting those folks who are creating or producing food locally, and thereby providing more access for the rest of the community to those fresh foods. And then the last one is about inventorying, developing, and utilizing Salem's urban orchards. So that doesn't necessarily mean like a whole group of trees that produces fruit that we're managing as a city. It maybe means looking at ways to partner with an organization who's keeping track of where we have maybe street trees that produce edible food, or trees that produce fruit in parks, and looking at ways to utilize that food that's produced rather than letting it just go to waste. So then there are a few other ideas that didn't necessarily fit nicely into one of those other topics that have come up more recently that we think are, that we've heard are important. So the first one is increased internet access. So this policy idea would be about increasing the availability of free public internet access in Salem. So whether that's the city providing additional Wi-Fi hotspots or more stations at libraries for people to access the internet, just expanding the opportunities for that. The next one is about allowing childcare opportunities more broadly in Salem. So looking at ways to make it easier to have childcare in more locations could support both working parents as well as people who provide that service as their livelihood. So that's something that we already had as one of our policy ideas, but we have heard that it's important. So we wanted to emphasize it here. And then this last new idea from the community is about increasing access to resources for community nonprofits and small businesses, and making sure that they have the support they need to kind of navigate our city processes and regulations. So sometimes that can be a barrier to smaller organizations that are trying to do good in our community. And so this would be about looking at ways to support them and make sure if, for example, they wanted to expand into a new space or provide a new service, that they understood how to go about doing that. So I think we'll open it up for questions. I haven't seen any questions pop up in the chat yet, but we went through a lot there, and I hope that folks have some thoughts on all of that. Got it. So there's a question here about when we'll be presenting back some more formal policies and distinguishing things that are maybe more regulatory versus more incentive-based. So we'll take all this information we're gathering, and it's going to take some time to crunch all the information that we've gotten. Our policy survey, as well as the interactive zoning map, will be open until June 11th. And then we'll close those, and we'll take all that information that we've got and start making revisions. So it'll take us a while to work through all of that, but we're hoping that sometime later this summer, we'll be able to present our revised policies to the community to see. So we have to ask for a little bit of patience, but I know it's something worth looking forward to. I think it's going to be, we've gotten a lot of really good feedback, and so I think we're looking forward to digging into all of it.
And I would also add that I think that it will become a little bit more clear when you see the full language. I think a lot of the, what we've written is just kind of shorthand for what that policy could be. So it'll be more clear where it says like the city shall or should or require or encourage. Those words will be in there, and it hopefully will be more clear.
Good question. Will there be opportunities to provide input at the end of the summer? Yes. So we plan to present our updates to our policies as well as our revised zoning map to the community before we share them with council. You'll be able to either call or email us with input anytime. And then our work session with council later, maybe early fall, is also a public process. And so you'll be able to provide testimony there as well. And that's before we start looking at the adoption process.
Do you want to move forward, Austin? I think we've already kind of talked about the process, but our next.
Sure, yeah.
About the process. So this is kind of what we were just saying. We're still collecting input. We will revise everything and make that available to the public before we go to a work session. We're tentatively hoping to have a work session with the Planning Commission and City Council in October. And then we wouldn't start an adoption process until after that. So it'd probably be end of the year. But we would hope to have everything kind of together in a package before we go obviously through the adoption process. This is just our project website, cityofsalem.net/oursalem, and our policy survey is still open. I think we've had like 150, close to that, people do it. So please spread the word. We'd like to get more input, as much input as we can. And then the other portions of the project beyond the policies really have to do with the zoning map. and zoning subcommittee. So last week, if you remember, if you were here or if you watched, instead of having a policy meeting, we really focused on the proposed zoning map. And so that map again is open for comments till June 11th, and at which time we'll close it to comments and start really taking a look at it all and seeing what revisions we would make before, again, we brought it back to the committee into a work session. And then the zoning subcommittee is really 4 planning commissioners and 4 city councilors, and they are focused on 6 different potential changes to the zoning code. So if you think about, heights, parking, densities, and ways of reducing greenhouse gas emissions from transportation. So that zoning subcommittee is meeting actually tomorrow at noon. So if you want to watch that meeting or participate or provide comments, all the information is on our project website. And that's our project website. Even if we close the survey or we close the interactive map, you can email me or call me anytime, even after that, to provide comments. Because this we know is like an ongoing process. So we're always open to comments. So there's a comment here. The proposed House Bill 2001 draft changes seem to be a positive alternative to the widespread use of R4 zone. Might a reduction R4 be considered? Yeah, so the R4 zone is kind of 2 things. It's very much implementing House Bill 2001, but in addition to that, it is allowing for broader live workspace. So we are taking another look at the R4 zone, what that looks like, where it is, and if we want to restructure it somehow. So we are taking a second look at that, also based on the community comments. Is there another question that I missed? Sorry.
Yeah, there's a couple others. One of them says, has impact to wildlife been considered in development? There are existing active corridors, for example, in the Gibson Creek Brush College area that need to be looked at before development is pursued.
Yes, we are considering that. And as we kind of start looking at making potential revisions to the map, I've seen there have been a lot of comments related to wildlife in that area. And we are going to be meeting with Julie and Patricia and looking at different ideas and on the map as well. So yes, we will be further considering that.
There's also a comment that says, I know a lot of folks seemed very interested in the transportation and housing aspects of the plan. So I hope that future outreach will get to dive deeper into those topics. One thing that seemed really important in the previous meetings was owner occupancy and how the city might encourage that development, since it's tied tightly with affordability. I guess that's more of a comment than a question, but I appreciate that input. Thanks. Another question, will the PowerPoint slides be posted on the webpage? Yes, we have been posting the slides for each of these policy meetings on the project website. So we'll be sure to get those up in the next few days here. The next one says, appreciate attention to climate action and integrating land use and transportation. Encourage walking, biking, transit. Safety is critical. Transit corridors are on streets that carry heavy, fast moving traffic. We have to prioritize safety for biking and walking, including biking and walking to bus stops. I appreciate that. That's definitely something we're thinking about, and we've been coordinating with the transit district and will continue to do so as they work on their long range planning to make sure that we're aligning back and forth with them.
Then there's a question, would the idea of neighborhood hubs be more appropriate as a zoning option rather than a prescriptive legislative formal on the map adoption? So one of the things we did here through all of our outreach is that while there's pretty broad support for neighborhood hubs across the community, people definitely wanted not to see them everywhere, right? And so they wanted to put kind of some limits around where they made most sense. And so that's one of the reasons that we have proposed locations. We have gotten input on different locations and we're going to take another look. But I think one of the things about creating a zone for a neighborhood hub is that people can then apply for that zone. If there's another location that makes more sense in the future, it could just be I don't know if that's a zoning option. It would be a zone people could apply for. Oh, there's another. Julie, there's another
Sure.
comment. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I see there's a question about whether or not there is a plan to plug existing holes in the bicycle and pedestrian network. And our transportation system plan does look at those gaps and has identified where they're needed and prioritized projects for addressing them. Unfortunately, we do not have a strong funding source that can go to those. We have applied for grants in the past. We'll continue to, seek funds through the federal funds that come to our region, state funds. We have transportation system development charges that are paid by development. And those were recently, like 2 years ago, the methodology was changed and the fees were actually increased, essentially doubled. And so, we are trying to tackle things as we can. But yes, we do have a plan. Unfortunately, the need does greatly exceed the available resources.
Thanks, Julie. Are there any other questions or comments?
Could I just ask a quick question? To clarify, I believe it was at the last meeting. Julie, I did not understand what you were saying about when they were researching West Salem and people were talking about the bridge. And I think you said that there had been a study done that said that even with all the multi-housing that would be coming into West Salem, that the traffic would not increase. And I was a little confused by that. Can you clarify that a little bit for me?
Which meeting are you talking about?
Well, I think it was last week and it was a zoning meeting, but I could be wrong on my weeks. They're blending together.
Okay, yeah, there was the zoning meeting. I'm just trying to remember from context. Can you repeat one more time your question?
Yeah, sure.
What you
I
heard me
think
say?
people were discussing the large amount of traffic and some traffic issues in West Salem and kind of talking more about like the extra bridge and things. And I thought that you were saying that there had been a study done for the traffic in West Salem and that you didn't, the study kind of indicated that the increased population in West Salem would not increase the traffic in West Salem. And I was just confused by that.
I would also be confused by that if I, and
maybe I totally misunderstood that.
Well, so I guess this may or may not get at what you were thinking about, but for the, so West Salem is projected to grow. There's a lot of vacant land in West Salem, relative to the rest of the city. And so West Salem is projected to develop, and that will increase the traffic and the trips in West Salem, definitely. The analysis that we did preliminarily, based on the current draft of the zoning map, is we looked at if we make changes to some of the land uses, like we go from single family to multifamily, how much worse, would that make traffic worse than it would be otherwise with just the single family development? So we were projecting out to the future under current zoning. If people came in and developed subdivisions and whatever else that they're allowed to on their land in 2035, and then we looked, okay, now with these zoning changes, if development happened, what would the difference be? And there were I think there might've been one place in West Salem where it looked like there was maybe what would be called a significant impact. But it's a high level legislative analysis, and we will need to do that analysis again because there are tweaks that are being made to the map based on public input. And so once the things have sort of settled down a little bit after the map comment period closes, Eunice and Austin and company will take that feedback, make some, propose some changes. We'll run it through the regional travel demand model again. And we will look to compare again and say, okay, are there areas where the traffic is potentially getting worse than it would be under 2035 under current zoning?
Okay. Thank you for
And
clarifying that. That does
yeah,
help.
it's confusing. And, and then if we are looking at areas where, say, maybe it says that, yes, it is going to be worse than it would other be, then we have to look at doing basically one of three things. We either can identify a transportation project that would address that area. So maybe there's an intersection that, adding an extra turn lane, would address that. We don't have to construct it. We have to put it into our transportation system plan. And then at some point, the idea, as funding is available, we'd construct it. The second option would be to roll back some of the zoning changes and say, rather than adding, 20 acres of, or 200, whatever, 20 acres of multifamily, only add 15 acres of multifamily, and then see if that brings the performance back in line with what would happen otherwise. And then the third option would be that the city council is able to decide that they want to accept additional congestion on the transportation network. And that is an amendment to the transportation system plan. If it's on a state facility, it also requires concurrence from the Oregon Department of Transportation, which of course in West Salem, both Wallace Road and Highway 22 are state facilities. So that analysis is something that we will present the results to, but we can't really do that quite yet because we haven't, we don't have an updated map to run it on. We will not move forward with any changes that would totally blow up, the transportation network. And but we're not comparing to today. We're making this assumption, not assumption. It's people have the right to develop their land as it is zoned today. And so, yes, traffic is likely going to get worse in the future. And we have projects in our plan to try to mitigate that. There are also policies both in our plan and that also are coming up through our Salem to try to encourage behaviors that can mitigate some of that traffic demand. Either by, for example, promoting teleworking, bicycling, walking, and even, essentially the whole mix of uses that are being proposed in some areas in West Salem are trying to make it more convenient to do those smaller trips by either walking or biking or, maybe stopping on your way home. And not necessarily creating a whole new trip by car. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks, Julie. I feel like we may have missed some questions now.
So I think there was one about food deserts and whether properties that are zoned residential agriculture could be incentivized to be used for food production for their surrounding neighborhoods. I think that's a new idea, something that we haven't heard during this project yet. It is an idea we could look into. I appreciate that thought.
And there's a question about owner occupancy and if we've researched any proposals or ideas. Can you explain that one? Maybe I'm not understanding it. Researching ideas around owner occupancy? You can go ahead and unmute. It's fine. Or Austin, maybe do you understand that question?
I'm wondering if maybe it's related to as opposed to having a vacation rental or a short-term rental sort of a thing, incentivizing the owner of the property to live there rather than to rent it out. But that's just a guess.
Maybe we'll get some clarification and circle back. And then there's a comment here. What transportation studies show is that increasing road bridge capacity does not reduce congestion because traffic increases to fill the capacity. What needs to happen is to make it less necessary to drive. Yeah, and I think that was kind of what Julie was referring to. Are there ways to, what we're trying to do is incorporate more shop services jobs within or close to residential areas and really focus also our housing and our redevelopment and our incentives on density, for example, where there is access to transit, for example. So there's other ways to get around.
Yeah, I think our idea of working to make more complete neighborhoods kind of addresses that. And I think that also the idea of making all modes of transportation efficient and viable also gets at that. So I appreciate that point.
There's a question. How are your policies dealing with access, shopping, medical, recreation for the aging senior population? I think we have quite a few policies around access and increasing access to things like, again, shopping, medical. I think we have one specific to medical and making it easier and more broadly allow medical services throughout the community, because we have heard that access to those kind of services is limited. So that is something we're looking at both as a policy and then in terms of zoning, how can we implement that? Thanks, Bill. I'm going to read the clarification. Okay.
And I would just add that we've been working with organizations like Center 50 Plus and Northwest Seniors and Disability Services to understand the needs of our senior population and how we can support them. So yeah, that's something we're aware of, and it's something that we'll keep working with those organizations to make sure we're addressing.
So I get the question finally. So you're saying, how do we get more ownership instead of rental? And it says it's specifically for middle housing or even the RM2 zone to assist with long-term affordability. There's actually a Senate bill that's likely going to be approved that goes along those lines of making it easier for middle housing to be divided into their own lots so that they can be sold for ownership instead of just rental. And I think that's something that's going to likely be passed. And that's very much focused on exactly what you're talking about, Bill. It's increasing ownership, not just rental housing. So it'd be smaller lots, essentially. Did that answer the question?
But it is on our radar screen, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, we've been tracking that and working on that, Bill. Are there any other questions or things that we missed or just comments? This is our last policy meeting, so feel free to chime in. Julie and Patricia, anything that you want to add? I know Patricia is going to be out and about quite a bit working on the climate action plan strategies and doing outreach this summer. Not to steal your thunder, Patricia.
Good, that's what I was going to add. So you already said it.
And I guess
so if you're interested in that, Patricia's the person. Go ahead, Julie.
I was just going to say that, and I know Eunice has said this a bunch of times, but the Salem is setting sort of the overarching umbrella of policies, sort of across the board for the city, and following that, we have certain master plans that are part of the comprehensive plan, both for transportation and for parks, that will need to be looked at to align them with that overarching umbrella. And so we will be working on sort of getting down into the nitty gritty with some of the policy stuff for transportation, looking at our projects and the prioritization. We have a good head start, jump start on that with the input that has been received through our Salem. There also are some things happening at the state level that we are monitoring that are going to lead to changes in some of our requirements for transportation planning. And so we're going to try to sort of bring all these different things together, as well as the climate action plan recommendations. And so we will be working on transportation for a while. And I appreciate your patience and your keeping with it and helping us to build a better Salem.
Thanks, Julie. I see one last question about the roles ADUs might play in the future population or tiny houses. So we do allow ADUs today. We currently have a break on system development charges to make them more affordable for people to develop. And we do see people building them. So that's something that we appreciate. And I definitely think there's a role for that in our future, meeting our future housing needs. As we implement House Bill 2001, we will also start allowing cottage cluster housing. So that kind of gets at that idea of tiny houses, maybe all centered around a shared lawn. So I think there's room in Salem's future for those as well.
And if you're interested in middle housing, the House Bill 2001 work session with the Planning Commission is next Tuesday, June 2nd. Is that the right date? Is it June 1st? Oh dear. June 1st, sorry, Tuesday, June 1st. So we'll be talking all about duplex, triplex, townhouses, quadplexes, in cottage clusters and how we're gonna propose to integrate those into our code. So if there's nothing else, I just want to say thank you again. Please do spread the word. Our interactive map and our policy survey are still active. So please participate. Thank you.